Contention 1, he blinded us with science. In 2005, Lawrence Summers, then president of Harvard University, attributed gender disparities in STEM fields to biology. Simply put, he doesn't think women have the same cognitive capacity to perform as well in these fields as men. Ironically, Summers' discriminatory perspective indicates precisely why the underrepresentation of women in STEM fields is a problem. When all our scientists look, think, and act alike, the engineered blind spots of color and gender-blind society make it all too easy to draw inappropriate conclusions from limited data points, handpicked to shore up our preconceptions about who we are and how we think the world works. That's not how science should be. The truth is, empirical methods provide us with a model for socio-political critique. First, demonstrate empirical flaws in the position you wish to undermine, and second, demonstrate how social prejudice led to these flaws. This is Sokol in '97. There's a long and honorable tradition of socio-political critique of science. First one shows whether the research in question is flawed according to the ordinary canons of good science. Then one attempts to show how the researcher's social prejudices led them to violate these canons. Having good political intentions doesn't guarantee that one's analysis will constitute good science. This general two-step approach is sound. Empirical studies of this kind can shed useful light in social conditions under which good science is fostered or hindered. The point here is that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Our empirical understanding of the world is enormously important, and recent social research has the potential to powerfully inform our political decision-making. Without it, we are hopelessly constrained by empirical phenomena that we don't understand. Pinker and 2. Ideas about the contents of cognition shed light on the roots of prejudice. Ideas about the capacity for reason can interpret policies of education, applications, technology. People always appeal to some conception of human nature, and the conceptions are often based on gut feelings, folk theories, and archaic versions of biology. Ideas about human nature cannot resolve policy. Without such ideas, we are not playing with full deck. Evolution is surely most deterministic for those who are still unaware of it. The imperative for empiricism to inform policy is greater now than ever. It will be impossible to sustain an ethical commitment to fairness, inclusiveness, or equality if our beliefs about the world are not firmly grounded in reality. Pinker and 2. The new sciences of human nature offer a touchstone by which we identify suffering and oppression, unmasking the rationalizations of the powerful. Intellectuals in the past tried to principles of decency or fragile factual claims such as that human beings are biologically instinctual, harbor no ignoble motives, and are utterly free in their ability to make choices. These claims are now being called into question. If we are not able to abandon such values, or if we are to abandon such values of peace, equality, or commitments to science and truth, then we must pry these values away from the claims about our psychological makeup that are vulnerable to being proven false. The taboo against human nature has left us playing without a full deck as we deal with the pressing issues confronting us, and it is for those who recognize the science as mind are permanently changing our views of ourselves and whatever the values we hold precious will survive or be enhanced. Contention 2, empiricism strikes back. Let's get this out of the way first. There is no inherent difference in mathematical reasoning capacities between men and women, D and innate. In a new study published recently in Science, Professor Jed and Hyde and colleagues used data from around 7 million U.S. children to find out if boys were performing better than girls. What they found was there was little or no difference in math. There just aren't gender differences in math performance. This result brings an impressive weight of numbers to bear on the question and helps challenge the widespread belief that boys are more gifted. What differences do exist are the results of feedback effects, not biological difference. This is D and innate. The widespread assumption that has been that there is a difference, beliefs can feed straight back into performance. If you believe the stereotype that as a woman you're bad at math, guess what? You will lower your performance. When the belief is widespread, it will lower performance. Conforming theory and studies that women are reminded of the stereotype, they actually do perform worse. We end up with a self-fulfilling prophecy. A better empirical explanation for women's underrepresentation is the competitive nature of STEM fields. Women are generally less inclined to engage in competitive activities. Field data doesn't give us an adequate explanation for why this is true, but there's no reason to assume it has anything to do with inherent capabilities. Science Daily in 12. Women tend to opt out of participating in competition even though they are equally or even better qualified than male colleagues. The weaker inclination is one of the reasons why even highly qualified women are at a disadvantage when making their expertise and skills are missing in relevant positions. It is nearly impossible to gather reliable field data. Nobody before us has dealt with the question scientifically of how interventions may affect later cooperation within a team. Contention 3, think positive. This data points to us to an easy corrective. Positive incentives negate the disinclination to compete while improving performance as a whole for both men and women, and do not generate future discrimination. This is Science Daily in 12. The subject had to choose whether they wanted to be paid for each correct calculation or receive 3 times as much per correct calculation if they chose the competitive scheme. Without intervention, the number of women willing to compete was only half the number of men. The frequency of competing women is significantly higher, whereas there was no significant effect for men. The frequency of women opting to enter competition was particularly high when they were strongly favored. The most exciting result of the experiment is overall performance did not suffer. We deducted additional points from the average performance, or from the additional points they would have performed better, or at least as well as male colleagues. The results suggest that interventions to support women do indeed have a positive effect. Belfatus and Sutter examined whether the implementation of interventions to promote women's results in later discrimination. None of the interventions affected later teamwork negatively. Affirmative action programs to remedy the effects of discrimination are thus justified on empirical grounds. Finally, to acknowledge that not all affirmative action programs are equal, but affirmative effort programs, which provide incentives for underrepresented groups like women in STEM fields, are both demonstrably effective and absolutely necessary for promoting a more gender-diverse STEM community. This is Hopkins in 12. Affirmative action has come to describe two very different types of efforts. One involves lowering standards to achieve diversity. The other involves taking action to overcome discrimination. Affirmative effort is essential in providing a level playing field for women who aspire to STEM careers. Unconscious bias results in undervaluation of women and their work. Universities began to address the problem by using more rigorous data-driven approaches to assess merit. This affirmative effort has been highly successful, increasing the number of women faculty in STEM fields and ensuring equality. People often ask, can she make it on her own? And can a conscious effort to support women or exacerbate the problem? Data on how women have advanced in STEM fields shows that the answer to both questions is no. It's like asking, but couldn't a really great runner win an Olympic race even if he had a 10-pound invisible weight strapped to his back? I'm open for questions.
Cool. The pink evidence talks a lot about empiricism.
Which one? I read a lot of evidence that talks about empiricism.
The first piece of pink evidence seems to indicate that empiricism is good because we only relying on human nature leads us to blind spots in our analysis. Or something to this extent. I don't know, either pink or a two card. I guess my question is, do you defend that we should only default to empiric analysis?
I defend the idea of consilience, which I define as the use of scientific insight to inform social scientific decisions to inform policy.
Okay, what happens when that scientific insight turns out to claiming that black people aren't human beings?
Well, then it's probably pretty terrible science.
Okay.
But
how do you delineate, like, how does one who believes so Harley and Pearson, how do you delineate between what is good science and bad science?
Science is a method that we can use to know that we are learning things.
Okay, I agree, yeah.
Science as a method is not really overladen with a lot of values in and of itself. It just allows us to learn things. Now, things have been done in science before that don't really deserve the name. The question of the ends to what science is put is entirely separate from the questions of method. My argument here is that we should not be criticizing the methods of science. We should be criticizing the ends towards which science has been put.
Okay.
So if there was
the scientific method is good, but the ends are bad. So how do we know that the conclusion of these STEM fields, right? So I guess what are STEM fields, right?
Science, technology, engineering,
math.
Who's
the major funder of these STEM fields?
Lots of people fund them for lots of reasons.
Who is the major funder?
You think there's a single funder?
I think that the military funds most of STEM fields. So what if the research that comes out of these STEM fields, is ways in which we can better, surveil black populations or, kill Afghani citizens? Right? I know, for example, UT is the Pickle Research Center, right, which is almost entirely funded for military lasers research.
Sure, that's
so
great.
What if they're bad? What about the bad guys?
Are you trying to advance the position right now that science is the reason why we kill people in the Middle East? Because I think that's wrong. I think that is a problem with the ends towards which science are being put. Okay. I don't think that's a problem with the enterprise of science
itself. Talk about affirmative effort. What is the difference between affirmative effort and affirmative incentives? Or affirmative action?
This is easy.
I guess you defend the rhetoric of the card that affirmative action is a lowering of standards for inclusion.
No. That says there are two types of affirmative action, or it has been described in two ways. One way of understanding affirmative action is to lower standards. That's a bad understanding. The better understanding is affirmative effort, which is programs to incentivize underrepresented groups.
Okay. Why should we? So why do you defend that it is a lowering of these standards to include people who have been?
I don't do that. I'm arguing that is an inappropriate understanding of affirmative action. That we should not define it as that.
Okay.
Or that it has been defined as that by groups in the past, but those groups are wrong, or they're not defending the sort of affirmative action that I have empirically proven is a good idea.
Okay.
What's up?
Campaign for what we provided.
You like my flip pad?
It's nice.
I use those every time I do UI.
Oh, it's 26. Do you just have to go to Brian timer? Here, I got a good timer. Awesome.
It's because you don't know the LD times.
Exactly. Like I said, I don't know how it's set. It'll just be one off.
Okay.
Everybody ready?
Yeah.
The rhetoric of progress and success of affirmative action ignores the only true affirmative action that's still alive and well in America, that of the prison system. By 2050, 1 out of every 2 black males will spend some period of their life in an ever-expanding prison system. Also, the liberal analysis of affirmative action ignores the fact that black women historically, are the fastest growing prison population in the United States. This is Joy James in 2000. Private prisons grew in the mid-1980s. Since 1990, 30 states have made it illegal to contract prison labor out to private companies. Contemporary Democrats have inherited a legacy of democracy in the U.S. of a racist, imperialist, capitalist state, one shaped by neo-slavery, ethnic chauvinism, and patriarchal culture. Yet the most controversial racist Democratic rhetoric not only obscure the past, but also deny the current resurgence of racist and economic segregation. The inalienable right to property is a racial aspect. Historically, people of African descent were legally considered property. Ownership belonged to private entrepreneurs in the antebellum years and later to state postbellum years. Governments imprisoned blacks who sell them to corporations. Whiteness functions as a form of property in those with existential capital, racial privilege to deploy rhetoric, legal military strategies, and policies to maintain and protect its wealth, policing and setting borders for those worthy and unworthy of participating in the U.S.-style democracy, manifests itself as racial endeavor segregation, functioning on 2 levels: to contain blackness, to protect whiteness. Affirmative action emerged in the 1960s and 70s as a key strategy in desegregating the U.S. economic, political, social, and educational structures. It was and is, in fact, a mechanism to free blacks and other people of color, then disenfranchised groups such as women, gays, lesbians, bisexual, transsexual, as well as differently abled people. Those who believe that affirmative action is the key anti-racist measure and litmus test for racial progressivism often do not analyze along the incarcerations, the resegregation, disenfranchised, and racially privileged. Affirmative action and incarceration and execution in conservative political climate increased competition as well as counterculture movement of civil rights again in previous decades has fostered advocacy for the surge of segregation. Despite economic and educational abundance in the United States, economic and educational access proven to be elusive for black Americans. The political manipulation of racial and economic fears continues to reify racialized communities and fuel new forms of segregation. The segregation ranges from gated communities for the wealthy to prisons, which foreign political prisons have described as black communities. Much has been said about affirmative action, particularly within the academy, where affirmative action has become the dominant discourse of inequality and a measuring standard for determining racist and anti-racist attitudes. Affirmative action has embraced the promise of moral protection, and consequently, as a protection will reverse racism that anti-affirmative action advocates claim they seek, advocating fairness in a popularized version of visually impaired, colorblind American society. Both the proponents and opponents of affirmative action engage in advocacy that is problematic because it takes little account for the conservative origins of affirmative action and its liberal intent. Affirmative action gains are overwhelmingly attributed to blacks and national racial rhetoric and imaging, even though quantitatively the greatest beneficiaries have been white women, increasingly other peoples of color. They attest to the endurance of the black-white binary in the American mind, the contemporary racialization of the deserving industrial sector as white as parasitic, and the parasitic sector as black. Where's your button for this? There we are. Sweet. Yeah, we'll just go on the next turn. And using affirmative action as a reformist measure is uniquely bad to the revolution. This is Hartman and Wilson 3. I've been thinking a lot about the notion of focusing one's appeal to the very state that has inflicted the injury. The reparation movement puts itself in this contradictory or impossible position because reparation is not going to solve the systemic ongoing production of racial inequality in material or any other terms. And like inequality, racial domination and racial objection are produced across generations. In that sense, reparations seem like a very limited form, a liberal scheme based upon certain notions of consumer ability that reinscribe the power of the law and the state to make a certain situation when clearly it cannot. As once Americans know that the wealth of the country was acquired, they'll decide that black people are owed something. Why would the logic of it they only knew why would you assume that like housing segregation is accent the logic if they only knew otherwise is about the disavowal of political will? That structured institutions, it helps you understand how important blackness is to the libidinal economy of white institutionality. They have the tiger by the tail and they don't have the tiger do its thing. People present the issue as though slavery is essentially a historical phenomenon that ended up the effects of which put blacks at what they call an unfair disadvantage to those in other positions who are chasing the American dream. Through such a move, the reparation folks waste and dole a knife, literally a political weapon. They keep the tiger in the cage because the weapon could spew forth untold directions. They're trying to simultaneously mobilize and manage black race. If reparations were precipitating a crisis in American institutionality, it would be worked out a lot differently from the way it's presented. One could present a reparation agenda in the way in which you present your book dealing with the despotism of black personality as it moves from generation to generation, from historical moment to historical moment, with despotism being the almost historical constant. Unleash the tiger and let it do its thing. And
All New World violence happens atop the mutilation of black bodies. To be black is to be the 0 degree of flesh. Before gender roles, there is ethnicity, and the core of the New World is the subjugation of race bodies. While women suffer from situations of inequality within civil society, the black subject is the excess of civil society itself. Before you evaluate the gender distinctions of the affirmative, we ask you to evaluate the lack of what it means to be black. This is Spillers in 87. In the historic outline of dominance with respect to subject position of the female and male adheres to no symbolic integrity. Black females achieve both their numbers in the community to a paradigmatic example of within a nation, our society which presumes male leadership in a subculture that is the Negro American, which performs not the pattern place a distinct disadvantage. These social and cultural subjects make doubles unstable in their respective identities and affects transported to a common historical ground, the socio-political order of the New World. That order represents the African and indigenous people presenting of actual mutilation, dismemberment, and exile. Their New World diasporic plight marked by the theft of the body, a willful and violent severing of the captive body from its motive will, its active desire. We lose at least gender difference in the outcome, and the female body and the male body become a territory of cultural and political maneuver, not at all gender related. This profound intimacy of interlocking details is disrupted over by the externally imposed meanings and use of the captive body becomes a source of irresistible destructive sensuality, and at the same time stunning contrary to the captive body reduced to a thing, becoming a thing for the captor. The category of otherness, the captive body translates into a potential for proto-troping and embodies sheer physical powerlessness that slides to a more general powerlessness. Therefore the body there is flesh, the 0 degree flesh of conceptualization that does not escape concealment. It is the flesh and blood of the entity of a colonized America that is essentially ejected from the female body in Western culture. The captive body that brings into focus a gathering social realities as well as a metaphor of value so thoroughly interwoven in their literal and figurative emphasis that distinguishes between their virtual uses, even though the captive body flesh has been liberated. And the alternative is to engage in a structural analysis of anti-blackness to lead to the overthrow of America. Anti-blackness structurally underpins all forms of violence, while racialized violence is still a daily reality for people caught in the position of slave. The rhetoric of oppression or exploitation alone asks only how we might redeem this failed American experiment. There is no analogy for the structural suffering of the slave, meaning the starting point for any authentic engagement with social violence must begin with the middle passage of the creation of anti-human void known as blackness, as packed in 2012. Others may have been oppressed and need suffer, but only the black pragmatic slave suffer structurally seeps into all elements of American history, culture, and life. The sheer scale of structural violence of Africans is a grandmother father of blackness in the United States. What was observed that Africans went to the ships and came out as blacks. In the same moment they were reborn as blacks, they were doomed to death as slaves. So the slave's power was heightened to the greatest possible capacity where she's marked by social death and permanent violent domination of themselves. After-pessimists contest the idea that the modern world is one within the price of labor determines the price of being equally for all people. In this capitalistic reading of the world, we summon blacks back into civil society by utilizing Marxism. While it is undeniable, of course, that black bodies and labor were used to aid in economic growth in the United States, we return again to the point that defines enslavement as accumulation and fungibility alongside natal alienation, general honor, openness to gratuitous violence. A slave that is not considered part of the class struggle, the slave could not be defined as lost, as can the post-colonial subject, the woman, or the immigrant. I'm right there too. Let me grab a pen real quick. I got one for you. Oh, I mean, not the end, but the part that I omitted from here. Okay. This is still 3 minutes, right?
Yes.
Are we?
Yeah,
ready?
we're ready. Go for it.
Okay.
What empirical claims are you basing your argumentation on? What are the facts from which the rest of this argument flows?
We'll make the empirical claim that the founding and the structure of civil society is based on the desecration of black flesh, mainly through the Middle Passage. The way in which during the Enlightenment period and the Middle Passage in which we constructed our notions of humanity was as a negation to blackness. So we defined ourselves as human because we were not black. And that was our signifier as human. This is kind of the founding underlying conflict that the Enlightenment struggled with and ultimately came to the conclusion
I'm a little bit, I asked for the empirical evidence that you're using to base the claims that you have made, and you're giving me a history lesson about the Middle Passage. I freely acknowledge that this is important and is something that we need to talk about, but I'm curious why this is the sort of evidence that you think drives current social policy, or should drive current social policy.
Well, I guess this would ultimately come down to the fact that I think that there should be no current social policy. In fact, that the current civil society and underlying thing, politics itself, something that should be fundamentally reevaluated, right?
Okay. Well, let me ask you kind of a more back to basics question then. Well, you know, a bit open-ended. Talk to me about science. How do you feel?
I mean, I am a biology major, so I think the science can generally be pretty good, but I think at the same time, right, science and an empirics approach, an approach that prioritizes empirics above an approach that looks at history and the way in which we socially construct things, and such as race, is one that is only going to lead to bad things.
I think I actually read a pretty good piece of evidence on the subject. The so-called card I read said that it's actually really easy to do a socio-political critique of science. All you have to do is demonstrate how a scientific claim was made incorrectly, and then use the social, historical, cultural tropes that might have influenced the error to demonstrate why that researcher showed a bias.
Okay, but I think that there are obviously errors in this approach, right?
What's wrong with that?
Well, so here's a perfect example, right? I think that we've pretty conclusively proven that scientifically there's no difference between black people and people of European descent. But at the same time, this does not stop police surveillance, does not stop and frisk laws in New York, does not stop the fact that the prison industrial complex is growing at an alarming rate and that the majority of imprisoned citizens are black. So where does science account for these kind of phenomena, right?
You think that the
like, how can you
the cops are all looking to science to tell them who they should stop and frisk?
No, that's exactly the point of my argument, is that you have to look to history. The cops are looking to skin color.
Okay.
And there's no way that science can remedy that fact.
Empirical claims made in the 1AC, do you think that you've refuted?
I think that I refute the starting point of the 1AC, the fact that we should engage the state, that we should encourage women to join.
When do I talk about engaging
I feel like it is a little fucked to encourage women to join programs such as the military and engage in the government, which is uniquely patriarchal and has been detrimental to people of color.
Do you guys have the username and password to the new HMU?
Yeah. Oh yeah, she could.
Do you need your app back? Yeah.
I think I have it.
I have part of it.
Oh yeah, you totally do. Yeah, I was looking.
Just to look in. To replace the pen that I lost. Just stop on there in front of the camera. You're still in your pen. Can you stop being Tyler Cook? 30 seconds. No. There's another H after the H. Oh my God.
Okay. NCAC. Or ACNC, I apologize. Okay. Contention 1 is the framework for evaluating this debate. The framework for evaluating this debate is empiricism. The so-called evidence tells you how you can do a an empirical critique. The evidence indicates that first you find a scientific claim which is an error, you demonstrate that that claim is an error, and then you explain the biases that caused that error to be made in the first place. It has a long and honorable tradition behind it that has led to lots of effective empirical critiques being done. The two pinker cards tell you why it's important to take an empirical perspective. The first one indicates that an empirical approach towards human social life does a much better job of explaining the origins of prejudice than other things do, and it also gives us tools to overcome these sorts of prejudice. Scientists are not generally racist because they recognize that race is only a phenotypical trait. That is, it is not exactly important in determining who we are, and it tends to only to have cultural importance. Nevertheless, these cultural traits tend to be overdetermined, which is why pseudoscience or bad science tends to crop up all of the time, and the socio-political critique of science becomes necessary. Cue the so-called card. Okay. The second card says that, or the second pinker evidence indicates that we cannot have ethical inquiry if our ethical inquiries are not based in reality. We need empiricism in order to ground our ethical commitments in understandings of how the world actually works. This brings me to contention 2. That is, the empirical facts which I have brought to the table for proving this argument. Fact number 1, women can do math. I think you probably knew this. Fact number 2, women tend not to participate in competitive fields. That doesn't mean all women, that means some women, or women as a general principle. These are things that sociologists have observed in empirical settings. I have also presented evidence that indicates that the appropriate corrective for women who are, for people who are disinclined to compete, is to offer incentives. That is, positive incentives in the form of affirmative action. Thus, I think that I have proven empirically that the resolution is true, that affirmative action remedies for discrimination are justified, and I've done this on empirical grounds. Now, NC. Let's go to Sokol. That was probably predictable. He has not established what facts that I have made or that he is contesting. He's only sort of made lots of allusions to the prison industrial context. I'm going to make a few no-link arguments. First, nothing about my app indicates or mandates that I defend the state action or the military industrial context or anything like that. I'm trying to argue that more women should participate in STEM fields because I think more women in STEM fields allow science to become better. The reason why Larry Summers was able to make the mistake where he said that women are not very good at math is probably because he hasn't talked to any women in science. He doesn't know them. He doesn't see them in the hallways in the university that he used to work at. And so he's unaware of the social biases that he has, and he can reflect them into his own scientific reasoning over and over and over again. Right? This is a failure of data. Right? We need to be able to apply data to these sorts of situations. Right? Second argument to make here is that he has not brought data to the table. He has not refuted any of the claims that I have made, so at the end of the day, as right as he might be, he has not proven the resolution false, so you can't vote for him. And finally, the so-called evidence indicates that even if he is right, science can do this better than he can.
Wow, that was really short.
Yeah, it's a 4-minute speech.
Okay. You claim the frame of this round is unfair anymore.
You can ask during prep time.
Oh yeah, you can ask.
Oh, I'm not prepping. We're starting. Sorry. I assumed we were starting.
There's
Oh.
no other station.
Oh, there's no CS. Oh, God damn this.
You can.
You can ask me questions.
Fucking terrible. I don't do this. Yeah.
Terrible.
Hey Nick, can you just like look at the timer at like a random amount of time and see your biasing between? Just be like,
This
shout
is our
something.
last speech, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
this is kind of awesome actually.
So loud. Can you talk about that? Mary, my principal's daughter. What's her last name that she married? The teacher told me that his daughter was going to and she married him. Yeah. Yeah. Is he in the NFL anymore? She's incredible.
I think that's how much time I have left. 2 minutes.
Oh.
I mean, very.
Alright, I'm gonna spell it that way too. Per. Six. This is hilarious. I know. We just have to get this next.
Okay. It's going to be the order of whatever that speech is called. So it'll be framework, the rest of the app case, and then onto his responses to the net case proper.
Yeah.
One, he says that the framework for this debate is empiricism. The framework for this debate is a competition between political methodologies that can best combat oppression. He says that we should approach oppression from the standpoint of empiricism. I say that's fucking wrong, that we should approach it from the standpoint of historical analysis grounded in the structural, paradigmatic suffering of anti-blackness. If I win that it is more beneficial to combat oppression to start from a standpoint of anti-blackness than empiricism, I win this debate. I know exactly what you're doing. Two, he says that empiricism can explain race. He was not able to answer the cross-sex question that empiricism cannot explain why black people are profiled by cops. It cannot explain why black people are the highest concentration of prisons, even though they are only 20% of the population. And it cannot explain racism. There was scientific racism. That's been disproven by science. Racism still exists. Attempts to move beyond historical analysis only try to invisibilize anti-blackness and redeem a state that is irredeemable. And the demand for political coherence reforms are blurry position to say their integrationist optimism cannot take into account the gratuitous violence that is directed towards blackness as Hartman, Wilson, and 3. People peel away the strength and terror of the evidence in order to propose some kind of coherent solution. We think about the position now that social science assumes subject to incentive exploitation, multicultural pursuits, that we have analogous identities in every attempt to employ the slave narrative, ultimately resulting in her obliteration, regardless of whether it was leftist slave occupies the position of the unthought language of freedom no longer become what has rescued the slave to the side of the re-elaboration of that condition rather than transformation. The desire to look at the ravages of brutality would still find a way to feel good about slaves if there was an autonomy. And the totalizing dominance of whiteness makes ethical relationality impossible. This is Yancey and 5. The relationship between being black and being a problem is not contingent, it is a necessary relation. Outgrowing the ontological state of being a problem is believed impossible. Temporality is frozen. One is forever a problem. To exist as black is not to stand out facing ontological rise and fill future possibilities of being other than what one is. The call for the other remains unheard within the space of whiteness. Same whiteness is a particular social historical formation that has reproduced specific discursive material processes. Whiteness strives for totalization to territorialize the very meaning of human. This card is important because what it indicates is that his analysis, even if we think that women, mostly white women who benefit from affirmative action, have a horizon of possibilities within science and mathematics field, it is fundamentally false for the black subject because they are denied an ontology via the white gaze. This card is bomb. And white supremacy is affectively discursively produced. It circulates through an assumed grammar that produces blackness as ontologically absent. The alternative disrupts the attempt to ahistorically pass off the violence of the white gaze. This is Yancey and 5. The burden of the white gaze disrupts my first-person knowledge, causing difficulties in the development of my body schema. Fanon began to see himself through the lens of a historical racial schema. The black body can be changed, deformed, and made to an ontological problem vis-a-vis the white gaze. The broader framework of white-sided perception of the black is operating both at the affect and discursive level. It is the uninterrupted live flow of young white boys' race experience. There is no experience as if the young boy's performance is indicative of defining his own self-invisibility. This is definitive structuring is always present as a constitutive imaginary background, which within the white boy is both the effective vehicle of his own white race and me. It is not tied to the roster. The white boy dwells within experiences engaged in the world with white racist practices. It is such a way that practices quad racist practices have become invisible. The young boy's response is part and parcel of an implicit knowledge of how he gets around in a Manichaean world. That he is oblivious to the historicity and cultural conditionedness of these modes of being. Fanon's corporeality is interwoven with a particular discursive practices to jettison all discourse regarding the body as real, being subject to material forces and such in the name of a postmodern body is an idealism that would belie my own philosophical move to theorize from the position of my lived real embodiment. Black alienation is not an individual question. The distorted historical racial schema that includes equilibrium takes place within the realm of sociality in a larger complex space of why that card was not. That should probably be another page. Whatever. And he says that the public sphere is good, that we should engage in the public sphere via things such as STEM programs of science and education, mathematics, and that we should look to the state-based solutions of affirmative action to remedy oppression. But public deliberation structurally cannot include the position of the slave because they are denied personhood by definition. The structural violence of slavery cannot be articulated in the political. I don't need to read this evidence because this is the same analysis that is offered by the PAC evidence read in the 1 and C, where PAC indicates that blacks are denied an ontology and that the difference between the black subject and subjects such as women as a starting point is that women represent a conflict within civil society that can be resolved through the state because they are not diametrically opposed. Society was not humanity. The context of humanity was not decided based on a gender binary, but it was decided based on we are white and you are not, and thus we can identify ourselves as human because blacks initially were created as subhuman. They still are. My evidence is much better than his. The pinker evidence is very vague about how science can, solve oppressions. You should really push that evidence. It gives no specific examples. For someone who wants so much data, that evidence gives no examples of how science can solve oppression. I feel like I've provided plenty of examples of modern day oppression that deny this. On to the 1 and C. He says there's no link, that the Act does not defend the state and military-industrial complex. This argument is not responsive. The state defends STEM programs which are largely funded by the state. The Act defends STEM programs which are funded by the state, largely through the military. 2, the Act defends working through the state. Affirmative action and affirmative effort, or whatever you want to call it, positive incentives are handed down from the state to people because it engenders, that's not the word I wanted, it creates a belief in the state that the state can create change. 2, he says, I talk a bunch about the prison industrial complex, that means nothing. Call for the James Evans Act for the round is incredibly specific about how when we talk about affirmative action, whether you are anti-affirmative action or pro-affirmative action. Too often, the liberal stance ignores the fact that the only affirmative action going on the status quo is that of prisons. Black populations are increasing in prisons at a staggering rate. That is the only area, and when we ignore prison analysis, then we ignore the fact that slavery is an ongoing condition and the fungibility of the black body is something that continues. He also does not respond to the Spiller's evidence at all, which indicates very clearly that during the Middle Passage, slavery obliterated gender categories.
Do you want to judge?
Sure.
You? Do you?
You're up there?
No. I was gonna ask if we could go to Maria.
So I learned that I can't form. I know, it's so hard sometimes. Sometimes I write paragraphs. I just fold like phrases and stuff. I don't necessarily know like just circle on. I don't really know like a function in how you don't do that as a debate. You just racism. Yeah, I just pull it across. It's science. So I voted on science. I voted on racism. Why? Well, I don't really like to talk about it. I circle.
Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. I've made a lot of empirical claims today, and I've made the claim that empirical claims are better than other claims because they're actually true. We know that they're true because they're observable and they're verifiable, and we can use them to inform our decision-making process at a later point in time. I've detailed a method for a critique that entails the use of empirical claims to debunk other worse claims, and then to look to this history of social hegemony to determine whether or not or to explain why errors were made in the first place. This is a method that we can use to to destroy anti-blackness in the United States, right? If we have science that says that there are not biological differences between black people and white people, that overcomes existing social beliefs that one group is superior to or inferior to another. This is not an argument that I have to win in order to win the argument. This is an important argument because it indicates that I've given you a method by which that the concerns of the negative can be solved. At the end of the day, he has not refuted the AC. He has said other things are important and we should talk about those. That may be true. He can be right about all of that. He might even be right that it's more important than what I have to talk about. That doesn't mean that the resolution is false, so you should vote for me. Okay. Are we good here? Women women are good at math. They should be allowed to do that. If you have an affirmative action program, then women are more likely to engage in math, and that's going to make science better as a whole because it means that there are more perspectives being involved in the activity. Okay. Now, NC. He's made a lot of arguments about things that empiricism doesn't explain. Great. I don't think that it has to explain why gratuitous violence gets visited on the black body, or I think that it probably could. If you went out and observed these things, performed a study of your own, or even just documented it in some way to bring it in, or we could begin to create a social scientific hypothesis for why these things happen. None of that evidence has been brought to bear in the debate, so it's kind of a moot point. We do not have a foundation from which we can begin to speak about these things. Right? He's accusing me of being a part of the sort of public deliberation that he's criticizing. My argument is different than this. I'm saying that science is the alternative to public deliberation. It's not the tyranny of the majority. It's not just sort of what everybody says goes. Science is what allows you to say that here we have facts from which we can draw conclusions, and no matter what other people think, we have the facts, and so they're true, and so you're wrong. This is how you overthrow something like racism, because you can say there is not actually a biological difference between a black person and a white person, so there is no reason why we should treat people differently as a result, right? He says that Pinker is vague, right? My argument is that there are bad ideas about cognition, that black people are stupid, or that women can't do math, that are informing the public consciousness right now. Science allows us to refute those claims, which is why it's a good vehicle for overcoming discrimination.